Robert Meyerson had been a janitor at Chang Global for 5 years, and in those 5 years, not one person in that building had ever looked at him twice. That was not an accident. Robert had worked very hard to be the kind of man people looked through instead of at. He kept his head down. He wore the same faded denim jacket every day. He pushed his cart slowly and quietly and did his job and went home. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody knew what he had done before he became a janitor. Nobody knew that the reason he worked so hard to be invisible was because there were people in the world who, if they ever found him, would not ask questions first. So Robert kept his head down and pushed his cart and protected his secret and protected his daughter and thought that was going to be enough. He was wrong, because on a Tuesday afternoon in November, he was pushing his cart past closed doors of the 14th floor boardroom when he heard a voice inside speaking a dialect of Mandarin so old and so rare that fewer than 100 people on earth could understand it. Robert was one of those people, and what the voice was saying made his blood go cold. He stopped walking. He stood outside that door for 4 full seconds, telling himself to keep moving, telling himself it was not his problem, telling himself that his daughter needed him to stay invisible. And then he let go of the cart. He pushed open the door. He raised his hand, and he spoke. In that moment, 5 years of silence ended. In that moment, everything changed. Robert Meyerson was 39 years old. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Chloe. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of San Francisco that nobody rich would choose to live in, and that was exactly why Robert had chosen it. The apartment was small. The rent was reasonable. The neighbors did not ask questions. It was perfect. Every morning, Robert woke up before 5. He made coffee. He made Chloe's breakfast. He walked her to school. He rode the bus to Chang Global. He pushed his cart through 8 hours of marble hallways and glass offices and a quiet hum of a billion-dollar company that did not know his real name. Then he picked up Chloe. He made dinner. He read her a story. He put her to bed. He sat in the kitchen in the dark for a little while, thinking about nothing important. Then he slept and did it all again. This was Robert's life. He had built it very carefully, piece by piece, and he was proud of it even though it looked like nothing from the outside. The smallness of it was the point. Small lives did not attract attention. Small lives did not give enemies a target. Small lives kept little girls safe. Robert knew this because he had not always lived a small life. Before Chloe was born, before the apartment, before the janitor job, Robert Meyerson had been something else entirely. He had worked for people whose names did not appear on any official document. He had traveled to places that did not appear on the paperwork for those trips. He had done work that required skills that most people did not know existed, and that Robert was contractually forbidden from discussing. One of those skills was language. Robert spoke 11 languages. 4 of them were dead or nearly dead, kept alive only in isolated communities or in the files of intelligence organizations that found old languages useful for exactly the reason that made them rare. Almost nobody could understand them. One of those languages was an ancient dialect of Mandarin that had been spoken in a specific mountain region of China for several hundred years before it was almost entirely swallowed up by modern Mandarin in the 20th century. Robert had spent 11 months learning it in a facility that did not appear on any map, taught by an old man who had been the last fluent speaker in his village and who had been paid very well to pass it on to a small group of American operatives who needed it for reasons Robert was never fully told. He had been very good at learning it. He was very good at languages in general. That was why they had recruited him. That was why they had used him. And that was why, eventually, things had gone wrong in Shanghai in a way that had left 3 good people dead and Robert Meyerson officially listed as a 4th. He was not dead, but the people who believed he was dead were the same people who had sent him into that situation in Shanghai, and Robert had decided, when he crawled out of it, that it was better to let them keep believing. He had taken a new name. He had found a city. He had gotten very quiet. And then Chloe had come into his life, and quiet had become the most important thing in the world. So when he walked out of the boardroom on that Tuesday afternoon, Robert was not thinking about the shocked faces of the Chang Global executives. He was not thinking about the pale, rattled face of the man from Kairos who had been speaking that ancient dialect. He was not thinking about Jolly Chang standing at the head of the table with her hands flat on the polished wood and her eyes fixed on him with an expression he could not read. He was thinking about the 14 security cameras on the 14th floor and whether any of them had a clear angle on his face. He picked up his trash bag. He walked back out. He finished his shift. He said nothing to anyone, but he thought about those cameras for the rest of the day, and the more he thought about them, the worse he felt. He knew which cameras were on that floor because he had spent his first week at Chang Global mapping every camera in the building. He had done it quietly over time, the way he did everything. He had not done it because he was planning something. He had done it because knowing where cameras were was the kind of knowledge that had been trained into him so deeply that not mapping them would have felt wrong. Like leaving a door unlocked. Like not checking under the car. By the time his shift ended, he had made a decision. He was going to go home, pack his emergency bag, collect Chloe, and be gone by morning. He had a bag in the back of his closet that had been packed and repacked every few months for 5 years. It had cash in it. It had 2 clean identities. It had everything a man needed to disappear quickly if disappearing became necessary. Robert had hoped he would never need it. Now, he thought he probably did. He picked up Chloe from her after-school program. She talked about a boy named Marcus who kept getting facts wrong about animals. She talked about a project her class was doing about weather. She talked about the pigeon she watched from their kitchen window every morning, the one she had named Gerald, who she was convinced had a complex emotional life. Robert listened to all of it. He bought her tacos from the place she liked. He brought her home. He put her to bed. He sat in the kitchen. He looked at the closet at the end of the hall, where the bag was. And then he did not go get the bag, because Chloe had said goodnight to him the way she always did, in a voice that was already half asleep and completely certain that he would be there in the morning. And he could not make himself be the person who turned that certainty into a lie. Not yet. Not unless he absolutely had to. He told himself he would wait one more day and see what happened. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in his bed and ran through the variables the way he had been trained to run them. The cameras were the first problem. The man from Kairos was the second. Jolly Chang was the third. He did not know yet what she would do with what she had seen, and not knowing was the part that kept him awake the longest. He had spent 5 years managing what people knew about him. That management depended on there being nothing extraordinary to know. A janitor who pushed a cart and went home was not interesting to anyone. A janitor who could speak ancient Mandarin fluently enough to shut down a corporate extortion in real time was a different matter entirely. He got out of bed at 4 a.m. and went and stood outside Chloe's room in the dark for a few minutes, listening to her breathe. This was something he had done occasionally since she was a baby, when the anxiety of keeping her safe was so large that the only thing that helped was standing close and confirming with his own ears that she was fine. He did not do it often anymore. He did it that night. Then he went back to bed and lay there until 5, and then gave up and made coffee. What happened was a knock at his door at 5:47 in the morning. Nobody knocked at Robert's door at 5:47 in the morning. He had chosen his building and this apartment, and these neighbors specifically, because it was the kind of place where nobody knocked early and nobody asked questions. He had been here 5 years without a single unexpected visitor. He looked through the peephole. Jolly Chang was standing in his hallway. She was alone. No security. No assistants. She was wearing a dark coat, and her hair was down instead of up the way it was in the office. She looked tired. She also looked like someone who had made a decision and was not going to change her mind about it. Robert stood at the door for a moment and thought about not opening it. He thought about the bag in the closet. He thought about the fact that she was here at his apartment at 5:47 in the morning, which meant she had found his address, which meant his cover was already more broken than he had hoped. He opened the door. Jolly looked at him. She looked past him at Chloe, who had appeared in the hallway behind the way Chloe always appeared whenever anything interesting happened, wrapped in her blanket and holding her cereal bowl, and looking at Jolly with the calm scientific curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she is not staring. "Your daughter," Jolly said. "Yes," Robert said. "She looks like you. People say that." Jolly looked back at him. "I need to talk to you, Mr. Meyerson. The real you, not the man who pushes the cart on 14. She paused. I have been awake all night. I think you have been too. I am not here with lawyers. I am not here to threaten you. I came alone, and I came early because I did not want to give you time to run. She paused again. Were you going to run? Robert looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, Chloe said, Do you want some cereal? We have the stars kind. Something moved across Jia Li Chang's face. Something that was not the expression of a CEO. Something more tired and more real than that. Thank you, she said quietly. That is very kind. Robert stepped back and let her in. He made coffee. Chloe sat at the kitchen table and ate her cereal and explained to Jia Li why Gerald the Pigeon was probably smarter than most people gave him credit for. Jia Li listened to this with what appeared to be genuine attention. And then Robert took Chloe to her room with her bowl and her blanket and her stuffed animals and told her to watch cartoons for a little while. And he came back to the kitchen and sat down across from the woman who ran an $11 billion company and had tracked him to his apartment before 6 a.m. And he said, Tell me what you want. Jia Li told him about her father. Jia Li's father was a man named Wei Chang and had built Chang Global from nothing in 1987. He had been a brilliant businessman and a careful man, and he had died 4 years ago and left his daughter a company worth $11 billion and an archive full of documents she could not read. The documents were stored in a private facility in the Presidio. There were more than 300 of them. They were written partly in modern Mandarin, which Jia Li could read, and partly in a much older dialect that she could not. She had brought in linguists and historians and language experts from 3 different universities, and every one of them had told her the same thing. The dialect was essentially extinct. There was no reliable way to translate it. The documents would likely remain unreadable. And then a janitor had walked into her boardroom and spoken it like it was his first language. Jia Li explained all of this at Robert's kitchen table while her coffee went cold. She told him that the man from Kairos, the rival company that had been pushing for a forced merger for nearly 2 years, had spoken that dialect deliberately in the boardroom. He had used it to say things he did not want her lawyers to understand. He had used it to tell her that her father's company had been built on fraud, and that Kairos had the documentation prove it, and that she could either accept their terms or watch everything her father had built get destroyed in court. He had said all of it in a language he believed she could not follow. He had been right that she could not follow it. He had not counted on Robert. What did he actually say? Jia Li asked the man from Kairos, in that dialect, what were the exact words? Robert told her. He repeated the words first and then translated them, and he watched her face while he did it. She was good at keeping her face neutral, but she was not perfect, and he could see the moment the full meaning landed. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Her hands, which were flat on the table, pressed down a little harder. He said my father's legacy was a fraud, she said. That is what he said. Robert agreed, and he said it in a language designed to make you feel the words without being able to fight back against them. He wanted you to understand the threat, but not be able to respond to it legally, because your lawyers would not know what had been said. Can they use those documents in court? Robert thought about this carefully. That depends on what the documents actually say. I do not know yet, but I know this. The dialect your father used in those documents has a feature that most translators would miss. There is a secondary layer built into the grammar. Certain phrases mean their opposite depending on where they appear in a sentence. Whoever translated those documents for Kairos probably did not know about that layer, which means their translation could be seriously wrong. Jia Li stared at him. Wrong in which direction? Possibly in the direction that saves your company, Robert said. But I would need to see the documents before I could tell you for certain. That was how it started. That morning, after Chloe left for school, Robert went with Jia Li to the archive in the Presidio. He spent the rest of that day and the next 2 days reading through 300 documents and teaching Jia Li enough of the secondary grammatical layer to follow what he was finding. It was slow, careful work. It was the kind of work Robert had not done in years, and he noticed that he did not hate it. The language was elegant. Wei Chang had been a careful writer. He had used the dialect not just as a cipher, but as something closer to a private record, a running account of everything he had done and why he had done it. written in a language he believed was safe because almost no one could read it. What Robert found in those documents changed everything Jolly thought she knew about her father's company. Wei Chang had been an intelligence asset. Robert had suspected it from the structure of the cipher, which matched a family of coding systems he had encountered in his own work years earlier. The confirmation was in the documents themselves. Wei Chang had spent 30 years carefully documenting every transaction, every contact, every decision he had made in building Chang Global, and he had documented them in this old dialect because he had known, at some level, that the work he was doing was dangerous and that the record needed to survive. The founding documents that Kairos claimed proved fraud were not proof of fraud at all. They were proof of the opposite. The transfers of money that Kairos' lawyers had read as evidence of coercion were, in the secondary grammatical layer, explicit records that no coercion had taken place. Wei Chang had not used his connections to force people into deals. He had used them to document, in a language no one could fake, that everything had been clean. Robert explained all of this to Jolly on the third morning and watched her process it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He spent 30 years building evidence that he was innocent." "Yes," Robert said, "of something someone might one day accuse him of." He knew this day was coming. He planned for it. He just planned for it in a language he thought would always stay safe. Robert paused. He did not plan for someone to find a translator. "He planned for me to find one," Jolly said quietly. She told Robert that about a letter she had found in the archive 3 months ago, written in her father's handwriting, in plain Mandarin. The letter said that when she found the right person to read the other documents, she should trust her judgment about whether that person was worth trusting. "He knew I would find someone eventually," she said. He believed in that. Robert did not know what to say to that. So he said nothing and went back to the documents. On the fourth day, Jolly told him about the gala. It was an annual industry event, held at a hotel in Nob Hill, and Kairos always sent representatives. This year, given everything that was happening, the representatives they were sending were more senior than usual, which told Jolly that Kairos was planning to make a move. She did not know what kind of move. She did not know when exactly, but she knew the gala was the most likely place for it. "I need someone with me," she said. "Someone who can listen to what is being said and tell me what it means. Someone Kairos will not recognize." Robert thought about it. What kind of security does the event have? Standard private security for this kind of event. I can add more if needed. "Do not add more," Robert said immediately. "If you add extra security, they will know you are expecting something. Keep everything exactly the same as last year. Act like nothing has changed." He thought for another moment. "Do you have a security guard who is roughly my size and who owes you a favor?" Jolly looked at him steadily. "I might." "Then you have a new member of your security detail for Saturday night." The gala was held on a Saturday in a hotel ballroom with windows that looked out over the bay. There were 300 people there, all of them with money and all of them with interests. Robert stood near the east wall in a jacket that fit well enough, with an earpiece in his left ear connected to Jolly's phone, and he watched the room the way he had been trained to watch rooms. He noted who arrived together and who split up. He noted who positioned themselves near specific people and who stayed near exits. He noted the small gestures that meant someone was reporting to someone else, the quick phone checks that were not really phone checks, the brief eye contact between people who were pretending not to know each other. He had been in rooms like this before, not parties. Different kinds of rooms, but the skill was the same. The skill was noticing what did not fit. In a room full of people who were all trying to look comfortable and natural, the person who was actually comfortable and natural stood out. And so, did the person who was trying too hard. Robert looked for the people in the middle, the ones who were performing ease with just enough effort to be visible to someone who knew what to look for. There were 4 of them. He identified all 4 within the first 20 minutes. 2 were Kairos employees he recognized from the company's public profile. One was a woman in the blue dress who kept checking her phone, and one was standing in a spot that gave him a clear sight line to Jolly at all times while appearing to be engaged in a completely separate conversation. He reported all of this to Jolly quietly through the earpiece, and she processed it without breaking her stride through the room. Jolly worked the room the way someone works a room, when they had been doing it since childhood. She moved from group to group, said the right things to the right people, laughed at the right moments. Robert watched her through the crowd and spoke quietly into his earpiece and told her things. He told her that the man in the gray jacket near the bar was someone's lawyer, not Caro's, and that he would approach her with a competing offer that she should appear interested in. He told her that the woman in the blue dress near the windows had looked at her phone 3 times since Jolly arrived and was almost certainly feeding a real-time account of the evening to someone outside the room. He told her to watch for what happened right after she talked to the lawyer in the gray jacket. The lawyer came over. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Robert listened to every word and watched the room at the same time, and he counted 3 people who paid slightly too much attention to that conversation. After the lawyer moved on, the most important of those 3 people took out his phone and sent a text message. The man in the blue tie. Robert said quietly into the earpiece, "Third to your left. He just reported your conversation to someone. Do not look directly at him yet." A small pause. Then Jia Li's voice, steady and low. "I know him. He is my director of strategic communications. He has worked for me for 4 years." Robert felt the situation sharpen. In his mind, the way situations used to sharpen when he was doing this work for real. Has he had access to anything sensitive recently? Anything about the archive or the documents? Another pause. Longer this time. 3 weeks ago, I showed him the archive. I was trying to find someone I could trust with my father's records. Her voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it that was not. I showed him the location. I showed him samples of the documents. That is how Caros knew what they had, Robert said. He was already inside before the boardroom meeting. That meeting was planned based on what he gave them. When I interfered, they had to change their plans. He paused. He knows your schedule, your meetings, everything on your calendar for the next month. Yes, she said quietly. He has full access. Does he know where Chloe goes to school? The silence that followed was very short, but very loud. Her school is on my personal calendar, Jolly said. I added it as a reminder. Parent-teacher evening. Yes, he has access to my personal calendar. Robert was already moving toward the exit. He called Maria, the woman who watched Chloe on evenings when he worked late, and he made her go knock on his apartment door and confirm that Chloe was safe and asleep. She was. Robert stood in the corridor outside the ballroom and breathed through his nose and let his heart slow back down to something manageable. Then he went back into the room. She is fine, he said into the earpiece. Maria is with her. He heard Jolly breathe. Now, he said, I need you to have a conversation with your communications director before the night is over, not to confront him. To feed him information I want Caros to have. What information? Tell him that your legal team has reviewed the founding documents. Tell him that you have retained a translation specialist who has confirmed the documents contain a secondary cipher layer that changes their meaning entirely. Tell him Caros' translation is wrong. He paused. I want Caros to know we understand what the documents actually say. That will force them to accelerate their timeline, which will force them to make mistakes. There was a pause. You want to use him? I want to use the information he will carry back tonight. Yes. Jolly went and had the conversation. The communications director listened and nodded, and 15 minutes later sent another text message. Robert watched him do it and felt something cold and certain settle in his chest. The mole was identified. The information was in motion, and Caros was about to learn that the weapon they had spent months building was pointed at themselves. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. The article appeared online the next morning at 7 o'clock. Robert was at the archive in the Presidio with coffee and a stack of documents when Jolly walked in and put her phone on the table in front of him with the screen facing up. He read the headline. He read the first 3 paragraphs. He put the phone back down. The article was in a financial industry publication that was known for publishing stories that arrived at very convenient times for very specific people. It raised questions about the founding documents for Chang Global. It did not make direct accusations. It did not need to. The questions themselves were the point. The article was a signal. And the signal said that Kairos was preparing to file a legal case and wanted the story in the public mind before the filing happened. Today or tomorrow, Jolly said. She was standing with her arms crossed and her expression flat. They're going to file today or tomorrow. Probably today, Robert said. The article went up early. They want maximum news cycle time before the markets close. My legal team needs 3 weeks to build a counter case using the cipher evidence. 3 weeks to compile the translations, have them verified by outside experts, and present them in a format a court will accept. She looked at him. Do we have 3 weeks? Robert thought about the communications director and the text messages he had sent. He thought about Kairos receiving the information about the secondary cipher layer and what they would do with it. We have maybe 72 hours before Kairos realizes their inside man has been sending them information we chose for him to send, he said. After that, they will stop trusting his intelligence and start trying to gather their own, which means they will start looking harder at things they previously considered settled. He paused. Including who I am. Jolly looked at him steadily. And if they find out who you are, then we have a different problem, Robert said simply. He spent the rest of that day going through the remaining documents with Jiao Li and her lead attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had been doing corporate litigation for over 20 years and who asked extremely good questions and wrote very fast notes. They worked through lunch. They worked through the afternoon. By evening, they had a complete translation of every significant document in the archive, organized by date and category, with annotations explaining the secondary cipher layer and how it changed the meaning of the passages Kairos had been relying on. Patricia said it was the strongest countercase she had ever built, and that she needed 48 hours to finish preparing it for court. Robert said she had 36. It was past midnight when Dennis Falk walked through the door of the archive. Robert had not seen Dennis Falk in 9 years. He had last seen him in a hallway in Singapore, 3 weeks before the Shanghai operation that had killed 3 people and officially killed Robert. Falk had been the one who sent them into that operation. Falk had been the one whose intelligence they had trusted, and whose intelligence had been wrong, and who had listed Robert as dead with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything. Falk was 60 years old. He was trim and well-dressed and had the completely still posture of someone who had spent decades learning not to react to things. He walked into the archive and sat down at the table without being invited. The way a man sits down when he has decided the invitation is a formality. He looked at Robert the way you look at someone you genuinely believed was dead. Spectre, he said. It was the operational name Robert had used for the last 3 years of his work. He had not heard it in 9 years. It went through him like cold water. Falk, Robert said. Jolly looked between them. She did not say anything. She was very good at reading rooms. Falk looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at Jolly. Your father hoped you would find this archive, he said. He told me so about a year before he died. He said he had built a record that would survive him, but that it would only mean something if the right person was alive to read it. He paused. I did not arrange for that person to be your janitor, but I am not surprised that it was him. You knew my father, Jolly said. It was not a question. For 30 years. We worked together on and off for most of that time. He paused. I know what he was. I know what he was documenting. I know why those documents matter, and I know that Kairos is going to file a case today that, if it succeeds, will destroy what your father spent 30 years protecting. He looked at Robert. I have been watching the Kairos situation develop for 6 months. I needed them to move. I needed them to commit to a legal action they could not take back, using evidence they believed was solid. Because when that evidence collapses, it is not just a case that falls apart. It is the 2 people inside Kairos who authorized this operation and who have been obstructing a federal investigation for 3 years. Robert looked at him for a long time. You coached the Kairos translator, he said. You made sure she learned the dialect without the secondary layer. Yes. You set Kairos up to fail. I set them up to move, Falk said, and then to fail. There is a difference. If I simply gave the federal investigators what I had, the two people I am after would claim they were deceived by subordinates and walk away clean. They needed to personally authorize a fraudulent legal action. They needed to be the ones who pulled the trigger. He paused. They have done that now. The filing today is all I need. And the intervention in the boardroom, Robert said, that was not part of your plan. No, that was chance. Or your conscience. Or both. Falk looked at him. But it served the purpose. It told Kairos that Chang Global had resources they did not account for, which accelerated their decision to file, which means the senior people made the call personally rather than delegating it. Robert was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Shanghai. He was thinking about 3 people who had trusted Dennis Falk's intelligence and had not come home. He was thinking about the fact that Falk had apparently known where Robert was for 4 years and had not done anything about it until now, and that all of this had been moving around him like a current he could not see while he pushed his cart and made Chloe's breakfast and thought he was invisible. You have been running me without my knowledge, Robert said. I have been ensuring you were protected without your knowledge, Falk said. That is not the same thing. In your world, it might not be. In mine, it is. Falk accepted this without argument. He had always been good at accepting things without argument. It was one of the most dangerous things about him. I am not asking you to go back to work, he said. I am asking you to finish what you have already started. 48 hours. 1 court hearing. And then it is done, and you go back to your life. And the 2 people who have been sitting at the top of the organization that sent you into Shanghai face federal charges for what they authorized this week. He paused. Not for Shanghai. I cannot give you Shanghai. But for this. Robert looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Jolly, who was watching him with her hands flat on the table, and her expression very careful and very honest. She was not telling him what to decide. She was waiting. He looked back at Falk. 48 hours, he said, and then I am done. Permanently. No contact. No future operations. No more managed situations I did not consent to. Agreed, Falk said. And the people who sanctioned Shanghai. You said you cannot give me that. Not criminally. Not with what I have. But they know. The people who authorized Shanghai are not the same people I am after today. The people who authorized Shanghai are retired and old and will die knowing what they did, which is, in my experience, its own kind of sentence. Falk paused. I am sorry. I have been sorry for 9 years. I know that does not help. Robert did not say whether it helped or not. He picked up a document and went back to work. The work itself was strange in a way that Robert had not expected. For 5 years, he had been a person who used no skills. He had deliberately made himself as simple as possible, as useful and as replaceable as a person could be. He had pushed the cart. He had changed the bags. He had replaced bulbs and wiped surfaces and done the small, essential, invisible work of maintaining a building. And he had been good at it in the way you were good at something when your whole survival depended on looking like that was all you were. It had been a kind of discipline, a particular type of focus. But this was a different focus. This was the focus he had been born with and trained until it was sharp and used until it was second nature and then locked away for 5 years. Reading the documents, finding the patterns in language, pulling meaning out of a grammatical structure that was built to hide its own meaning from anyone who did not know where to look. This was the thing he'd always been best at, and doing it again after 5 years felt the way he imagined it would feel to pick up an instrument you had played for 20 years, and then put down, and then finally played again. Your hands remembered, your mind remembered, and there was a specific kind of pleasure in it that had nothing to do with the situation it was happening in. He worked. Falk sat at the end of the table and occasionally asked questions and mostly stayed out of the way, which was, Robert reflected, probably the most useful thing he had done in 9 years. They were 12 hours into the final push when the thing Robert had been afraid of happened. His phone rang. It was a number he did not recognize. He looked at it for a moment and then answered. The voice on the other end was a man's voice, calm and professional, and carrying the specific kind of confidence that came from believing you had leverage. Mr. Meyerson, the voice said, or whatever name you're using, we know who you are. We know where your daughter goes to school. We know about the archive and the translation work. And we are prepared to make all of that information available to some very interested parties, unless you are willing to have a conversation with us about the direction the situation is going. Robert was quiet for 3 seconds. He had a very specific way of handling fear that he had developed over years of work in situations where fear was a constant. He did not fight it. He did not ignore it. He let it exist, and then he let it tell him what to do. The fear said Chloe. His mind said Falk. His training said next step. Who are you talking to? Falk asked from across the table. Robert held up one finger. Into the phone, he said, I would like to hear the full offer before I respond. The man on the phone told him. The offer was simple. Robert would provide Kairos with a translation of the archived documents that supported their narrative instead of undermining it. He would do this before the court hearing. In exchange, his identity and location would remain confidential, and Chloe's school records would not be given to anyone. I will need 24 hours to consider, Robert said. You have 8, the man said, and hung up. Robert put the phone down. He looked at Falk. He said, They know about the archive. They know about me. They are trying to buy a false translation. Falk nodded slowly. The communications director. He found your name somehow. Or, they got it from the boardroom footage. The boardroom footage was compromised. Robert said, I know, but before it was compromised, someone made a copy. He was already thinking past it, running through the options the way he used to run through options, quickly and without sentiment. It does not change the plan. It accelerates it. He looked at Jolly. I need you to call Patricia. Tell her we have 24 hours, not 48. And I need you to call your head of security and have someone sitting outside Chloe's school by morning who is not connected to you in any visible way. Jolly was already reaching for her phone. Falk said quietly, They cannot touch her. I have had eyes on her since this started. Robert looked at him. Since when? Since you pushed open that boardroom door. A pause. I told you. I protect the things I can protect, even when I cannot protect everything. Robert thought about Shanghai again. He thought about 3 people. He thought about the fact that Falk had failed before and believed he had learned from it and might be right and might not be. He decided it did not matter right now. Right now there was work to do. He went back to the documents. The court filing came through at 9 in the morning, exactly when Robert had expected it. Patricia was already at the courthouse. She had been there since 7, which was the kind of thing you learned about Patricia very quickly. She was always somewhere before you expected her, and she was always more prepared than seemed possible given the amount of time she'd had. Robert was not at the courthouse. He was in a service corridor 2 floors below the Chang Global Boardroom with Falk, and a phone connected to a line that Patricia's associate was holding open inside the room, where Jolly was meeting with her board. Robert could hear everything that happened in that room. The Kairos legal team arrived with their lead counsel, a man named Hartwell who had a reputation for being very good at cases he should not have won. He had a team of 4 associates and a stack of documents and the confident energy of someone who had never seriously considered the possibility of losing. Hartwell presented the case. He was thorough and he was skilled, and he laid out Kairos's argument with the kind of clarity that came from months of preparation. He walked the board through the founding documents. He explained what the transactions meant. He explained what the coercion looked like and what the paper trail showed. He presented his translation as settled fact. He talked for 40 minutes without interruption. Patricia let him finish. Robert had told her to let him finish. Let him commit to the full argument. He had said, let him say everything, then take it apart. When Hartwell was done, Patricia stood up. She had been sitting at the far end of the table with a very ordinary-looking folder and the relaxed posture of someone who is not worried. She thanked Hartwell for his presentation. She said she had a few observations. Then she dismantled everything he had built, piece by piece, over the next 2 hours. She started with the dialect itself. She explained what it was, where it came from, how long it had existed, and why it had almost disappeared. She explained the secondary grammatical layer in simple, clear terms. She explained how this layer worked and how it changed the meaning of specific phrases. She brought in her expert, a linguistics professor from Berkeley named Dr. Alicia Marsh, who had reviewed the documents for 12 hours straight after being called the previous morning, and who explained the cipher structure with the patient authority of someone who spent 30 years studying exactly this kind of linguistic artifact. Dr. Marsh was very good. She explained it in a way that a person who had never studied linguistics could understand. She showed the board, side by side, what Hartwell's translation said and what the actual translation said. She showed them how the founding documents that Kairos claimed were evidence of coercion were in fact evidence of an explicit absence. She showed them that Wei Chang had not used his connections to force deals. He had used them to document, in a language almost no one could read, that no forcing had occurred. Hartwell interrupted twice. The first time Patricia answered him in 2 sentences. The second time, Dr. Marsh answered him in 1. After the second interruption, Hartwell went quiet and did not interrupt again. Robert stood in the service corridor and listened to all of it through the phone. Falk was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man watching a thing he arranged a long time ago finally arrive. Robert felt something he had not expected to feel. It was not satisfaction exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was a feeling of a thing being set right that had been wrong for a long time, by someone who could no longer set it right himself. Wei Chang had spent 30 years writing the truth in a language he trusted. He had not lived to see it read correctly. But it was being read correctly now, in a room full of people who were listening, and what it said was what he had always needed it to say. He was not a fraud. He had not built his company on coercion. He had built it on work and intelligence and the careful, patient accumulation of trust, and he had documented every step of it in a code he believed would outlast the accusations. He had been right. He had just needed the right person to show up. After the hearing, when Hartwell and his team had gathered their documents and left the boardroom with the specific quiet of people who were already deciding how to explain a loss to their clients, Falk made 2 phone calls. Robert did not ask who he called. He knew what the calls were for. The 2 people at the top of Kairos who had authorized the filing, who had personally directed the legal action, knowing it was built on a flawed translation, were now exactly where Falk had needed them. They had put their names on decisions that could not be walked back. The federal investigation that had been running for 3 years had the last piece it needed. Robert did not hear the outcome of those calls. He did not need to. He went to pick up Chloe from school. She was waiting for him at the front gate with her backpack and her jacket half on, and her face carrying the expression she always wore at the end of the school day, which was a mixture tired and full of information that needed to be shared immediately. She started talking before he reached her. "Dad," she said, "did you know that cumulus clouds are the fluffy ones and cirrus clouds are the wispy ones and stratus clouds are the gray flat ones that make everything look sad?" "I did not know all of that," Robert said. "We are doing a cloud unit. I am going to teach you everything." She took his hand. Marcus thought cirrus and cumulus were the same cloud. "That is a significant error." "I know. I corrected him." "I am sure you did." They walked home. Robert bought Chloe a snack from the corner store the way he did on Fridays. She ate it while walking and kept explaining clouds with the thoroughness of someone who has just discovered that she knows more about something than everyone else she has talked to today. Robert listened to all of it. He watched the street. He noted the exits. He did it without thinking about it, the way he always did, and then he noticed he was doing it and let himself stop. There was no one following them. There was no one watching. There was nothing in the street that needed his attention except Chloe and the clouds and the corner they lived on. He made dinner. Chloe did her homework at the kitchen table and told him 3 additional things about clouds that she had remembered during the walk home. Gerald the pigeon appeared on the window ledge, and Chloe greeted him by name and reported on what he appeared to be thinking about. Robert made pasta and listened and was, in a way that he recognized was not nothing, happy. After dinner, after bath, after the standard negotiation about how many chapters of the bedtime book constituted a reasonable amount, after Chloe was in bed with her 6 stuffed animals arranged in their specific and apparently important configuration, after the light was turned to low and the blanket was adjusted twice, after all of that, Robert sat on the edge of her bed and read the chapter about the fox. In the story, the fox was far from home and had been for a long time. He had been away so long that he had started to wonder if home was still there the way he remembered it. He had started to wonder if the things he was afraid of were bigger than the things he was going home to. Chloe fell asleep before the chapter ended, the way she usually did, which meant Robert sat in the dim room for a few minutes and finished the chapter quietly to himself. The fox found his way home. Robert had suspected he would. The good ones usually did. Chloe had said so. The next morning, before Chloe was up, Jolly called. "I would like to offer you a position," she said. "Officially unofficial. Retained linguistic consultant for sensitive matters. Paid through a holding company with no visible connection to Chang Global. No name on any document. No face in any file." She paused. "The terms you named. 4:30 every day. No exceptions. Everything clean." Robert stood at the kitchen window. Outside, Gerald the pigeon was on the ledge, looking at the street below with a grave, focused expression that Chloe interpreted as emotional depth and that Robert suspected was just hunger. "The records," he said. "Chloe's school. Everything connecting that name to the city. Done as of yesterday evening. Patricia's associate handled it personally. There is nothing to find." He thought about it. He thought about what Falk had said, that the people who had authorized Shanghai were old and retired and would die knowing what they had done. He thought about whether that was enough. He decided it was not exactly enough, but it was what existed, and what existed was better than nothing. He thought about the archive. About 300 documents written in a dying language by a careful man who had not planned to die before the record could be read. There were other archives like that. Robert knew there were other records written in other old languages by other careful people who had needed to document things that the normal languages of business and law could not safely contain. Those records existed. They waited. And now there was a very small, very quiet office somewhere in the back of Jia Li Chang's empire that had someone who could read them. 4:30, Robert said. Without exception. Not once in a year. Not once in 5 years. Not for any emergency or deadline or thing you decide is critical enough to justify it. 4:30 means I am home when she gets out of school. That is not negotiable. Not negotiable, Jolly agreed. And I have final say on anything that involves my name, my face, or my location. If I say no, it is no. Not a discussion. No. Agreed. And if at any point I decide it is done, it is done. No contract. No obligation. I walk and you let me walk and there are no consequences. Agreed, she said again. Robert looked at Gerald on the window ledge. Gerald looked back at him with his small orange eyes. Then we have an arrangement, Robert said. He did not celebrate. He made coffee. He cut up fruit for Chloe's breakfast the way he did every morning. He heard her alarm go off and then heard her turn off and then heard the small sound of her getting up and finding her blanket and padding down the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair going everywhere and her blanket dragging on the floor and her eyes still mostly closed. Gerald is outside, she reported. I know. I saw him. He looks thoughtful today. He does look thoughtful. She climbed onto her chair and pulled the cereal toward her. Robert poured the milk. Outside the window, the city was starting its morning. Buses and bikes and the distant sound of traffic, all of it completely ordinary and completely indifferent to anything that had happened in the past week in boardrooms and archives and courthouses and service corridors. The city did not care. The city just kept moving the way it always moved, and Robert had always found that reassuring rather than cold. The world keeping its ordinary shape was not a small thing. It was a thing. It was the whole point. Robert drank his coffee and thought about the small, careful life he had built in this apartment in this city. He had built it to be invisible. He had built it to be safe. He had built around the single most important fact of his existence, which was that there was a 6-year-old girl at his kitchen table who needed him to be there every day and who had no idea how many complicated and dangerous things her father had done and was doing to make sure that being there remained possible. He was still going to be invisible, mostly in the ways that mattered. His name would not appear on anything. His face would not appear in any file. He would remain, to the world that needed to believe it, the dead man he had decided to become 9 years ago in a city on the other side of the world. But He was also going to go to work tomorrow, not with a cart, not with a trash bag. He was going to sit in a quiet room and read old documents in old languages and tell a very careful woman what her father had been trying to say, and he was going to do it until 4:30, and then he was going to stop and go home. That felt, to Robert Meyerson, like a good deal. Chloe finished her cereal and began the detailed weather report she had prepared based on the clouds she could see from a window. There were cumulus clouds to the north, which she said were the fluffy ones and meant fair weather. There were some cirrus clouds to the east, which she said were the wispy ones and did not necessarily mean anything bad, but required monitoring. Gerald the pigeon had moved to the far end of the ledge and appeared to be looking at the cirrus clouds with what Chloe identified as healthy professional concern. Robert listened to all of it. He refilled his coffee. He thought that his daughter was going to be a meteorologist or a naturalist or possibly a very thorough journalist, and that whatever she became, she was going to be excellent at it, and that all he had to do was make sure he was home at 4:30 every day for the next 12 years to watch it happen. That did not seem like a hard assignment. He had done harder. He thought about that for a moment, about the things he had done that were harder. The 18 months in Southeast Asia, the 3 years before Shanghai, the night in Shanghai itself, which he had survived and 3 other people had not, and which he had carried with him every day for 9 years in the same way you carry something heavy for so long that you stop noticing it was heavy. It was just there. It was just part of how he walked through the world. He did not know if it would ever not be there. He had stopped expecting it to disappear. He had made peace, in a careful and limited way, with the fact that some things did not go away. They just got quieter. The weight did not leave. You got stronger. That was the arrangement. But Chloe was 7 in 3 months, and she wanted a birthday party. And Patricia had used the cipher documents to take apart a fraudulent legal case in front of a boardroom, full of people who would remember it. And Wei Chang had spent 30 years writing the truth in a language he trusted, and the truth had survived him, and it had been heard. And the people who had sent 4 operatives into Shanghai and come home with one had not escaped the consequences of everything. Even if they had escaped some of them, none of that made everything right. Robert was old enough and honest enough to know that some things did not get made right, but it made some things better. And better was not nothing. Better was, in fact, quite a lot. He put his coffee down and went to get her backpack, ready for school. The story of Robert Meyerson teaches us that the most valuable thing a person can possess is not money, status, or power. It is a skill that nobody knows they have. Robert spent 5 years being invisible on purpose, and the world looked right through him, because he let it. But when the moment came that truly mattered, one rare skill, a language almost nobody alive could speak, changed everything in a single room in under 2 minutes. The lesson is this: never let the world opinion of what you are worth convince you that your gifts are small, because the right skill in the right moment at the right time is worth more than a lifetime of titles and offices. Robert also teaches us that protecting the people you love is not weakness. It is the highest form of discipline. Because every morning he chose a quiet life not because he was afraid, but because Chloe needed him alive and present more than the world needed him heroic. And Wei Chang, the father who spent 30 years writing the truth in a language he trusted, teaches us that integrity does not always get rewarded in the moment. Sometimes you build the evidence of your own honesty knowing that a stranger, years after you are gone, will be the one who finally reads it and makes it count. Do the right thing anyway. Tell the truth anyway. Protect what matters anyway. The right person will show up when the time comes. Before you go, let me ask you something. If this story kept you listening until now, why not subscribe? A lot of people watch. A lot of people enjoy. But most never click that button. Don't just be a viewer. Be part of this, like the video if it hit. Share it with someone who'd love it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And drop a comment telling me your favorite part of the story. I really want to know what stood out to you, though, and be honest. Do you want part 2?